Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What's your big unbelievable story? My grandpa has seen aliens. He told everyone this story, but most people would just blow him off when he told them. But we have the baseball bat as proof, and my grandma was there to witness it as well. When we finally asked them, separately of course, they told the story exactly the same. So when he was younger he was coming home late one night after a date with my grandma. He pulls into the driveway of their house and notices some sort of strange light about his garage. He said it was green lights in a circle pattern. Him and my grandma both stopped and watched it for a few seconds and realized it was getting closer to them. Now my grandpa was never a level-headed man. So instead of getting in the house or getting in the car to leave, he ran into the shop, the one with the weird green lights above it, and grabbed his baseball bat. He said whatever this thing was, it got so close he could eventually see that it was smooth and metallic, and had probably a dozen green lights around the whole base. So he takes his baseball bat and just chucks it at this thing. He heard it smack the bottom of the UFO and then land on top of the garage. This UFO just took off after. He said the damn thing was faster than any airplane he had ever seen. When he went to get the bat the next morning, it was splintered and had a couple chunks taken out of it. He always kept that bat as a reminder that we are definitely not alone out here. I think I've lived an interesting life so far. I'm only 22 male. I grew up a legit conjuring kid. Not long after that I spent pretty much my whole later childhood and teens in and out of mental institutions, no fault of my own, drugged into oblivion. That shit was crazy. Turned 17, got a little freedom because I finally moved to my grandparents, cold-turkeyed the absolute mind-blowing amount of pills I was at that point hooked on legally as a kid, and joined the Marines with a closed record. Proceeded to do cybersecurity at NATO HQ&A for the Marines, which turned me into at face value a political nut, because of what I've seen, out of the military now, and a devout Christian with zero doubt in my mind the existence of ghosts, demons, and God. Although I only understand what I've physically seen, so sometimes I struggle with God, even though I'm a baptized Christian who's experienced a medical, but I know for a fact there's a down, and I've seen evil, and I've witnessed how Jesus' name affects it. There's no way in Christ I'm going to type it all. But if you want to hit me on a podcast or call, I'll blow your mind. My goal in life is to start my own business, get filthy rich, and spend as much money I can securing our future as a species, and to make everyone's life as best as possible, although while exposing our elites and somehow managing my wife, kids, and family, and not getting killed by some hitman in the process. Pipe dream, but I think God built me strong along the way and I can do it. I had bacterial meningitis, although remember is a big word here. I'm missing fairly large swathes of memory from the days leading up to my admittance to the hospital, but I was told I collapsed at one point, lots of spasms, and was rushed to the ER. They tried due to a lumbar puncture about 5 times, but couldn't manage to get the needle in properly. I even had a nurse fold me up to open up my vertebrae, but to no avail. I had a 42 degrees fever, and so they decided to just call my father, whom I hadn't seen in years, and tell him to come and say goodbye. And for some reason, even though they decided there was nothing else they could do, I didn't die. Spent Christmas and New Year's in the hospital, and got to go back home. Another couple were back when I was a sailor. I was sailing full-time, 1 month on, 2 weeks off, and studying for maritime officer when I was ashore. Nearly died once when a 20-centimeter thick line snapped in a storm, and missed my head by a few hairs. I nearly died when a cargo crane picked up a container by 2 corners, instead of all 4, and it dropped down from a fair height, nearly on top of me. Another time, it wasn't a container, but a stacker, a 3-kilo, semi-solid metal cube, that missed me by all after falling from 5 layers high. Once, I was inside the double wall of the ship's outer layer, looking for a fuel leak, when I lost consciousness due to the lack of oxygen. They were supposed to have aired it out first, but it wasn't. The only reason I dodged that bullet was due to the tripod attached to the manhole, through which my colleague managed to haul me to safety. At one point, I nearly died of an amphetamine overdose. I was rushed to the hospital once due to alcohol poisoning, and nearly bled out once after having accidentally cut myself while drunk. Oh, and I stuck my tongue into exposed live wires as a baby, too. There's more shit that had happened, but you get the idea. People tend to think they're tall tales, as nobody nearly dies that many times, and I'm only 26 years old. Purchased a townhouse despite the unmistakable feeling of something being off. The price was good and the townhouse's appearance was really nice. Started with my children saying weird things. I can't remember exactly, but things like, "Why were you standing in my doorway last night?" Some other weird shit too. Escalated when I walked into my bedroom and my sleeping wife all of a sudden sat up so she was resting on her elbows and said, "The shadow man was here." I just backed out of the room. We've lived there about a week now. Kids are at school and wife is at work. Naturally, I decide to work one out. The bathroom lights are very bright though. So I had put a little lamp in there. I kept the main lights off and just turned the lamp on. Get in the shower and start going to town. I had my back to the lamp when all of a sudden something passes between the lamp and me. To my right against the bathroom wall there's a couple of feet still illuminated by the lamp and I see the unmistakable silhouette of a person pass by. Normally this would have been terrifying but I was in full-blown odd brain mode. So I was like, "Come on in. The water's not too hot." Nothing came in, but also never saw the shadow person again and the house felt cozy from then on. I was thrown from a vehicle going 50 miles per hour and was unharmed. I remember time slowing down and understanding what was about to happen. The accident was imminent. I hear the loudest sound I've ever heard. A huge bang. The next thing I remember was waking up on the ground and getting up and seeing my friend sprinting toward me. He stopped right in front of me and just kind of stared. Then he hugged me so tightly for a brief second and then jumps back and apologizes profusely thinking I was gravely injured. He then stared back at the car, then back at me, then back at the car. Then asked what I was doing over here. The SUV had flipped twice after I was ejected. Everyone who remained in the car was also okay. I guess there was about 10 minutes that I was unconscious on the ground. In hindsight I should have gone and gotten scans but I was too scared of my mom finding out I wasn't wearing my seatbelt so, yup. It was also just too weird. I was fine. It was too strange. I couldn't make sense of it. Nobody could. It felt like a dream. I have no idea how I got out of the car. My window was up. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, thank goodness, because the entire side of where I was sitting was smashed in. I had a few very light scratches. Barely even bled. I've had a cat scratch me that left more of a mark. I had no bruises. I had no pain or anything the day after. Absolutely zero anything other than the minor scratches on my arm. So this is how it went down. The vehicle was traveling going down the road at around 50 miles per hour after a fresh rain. I was sitting in the back seat with a friend. He ended up in the back area of the car, to the right next to the door, passenger side. The driver accidentally got off the road for a second going around a turn with a sign advising 35 miles per hour and overcorrected, which led to the vehicle doing a 180 and slamming into an embankment and then making it to a full 360 and then flipping twice and landing upright in the middle of the road about 30 yards down the road from where it hit the embankment. I was located about 30 yards also, but in the opposite direction from where it slammed into the embankment. I get dreams about places years before the places exist/I visit them. When I was 6 I had a dream I was at a cemetery with my family. There were Halloween pumpkins and we were standing by the grave of my grandma's uncle. Now the first time that I ever went there, aka last year, I realized that it's actually the exact same cemetery from my dream, even the pumpkins were the same. Funnily enough, that said person whose grave we were standing by in my dream died several years later. Next time it happened when I was 9, I had a dream about some kind of hotel I was at with my friends. Nothing too interesting. Turns out, that hotel wasn't even built when I dreamed about it, and we actually went there 2 weeks ago. Another time, I dreamed of a hike I was at, only to go down that hike 2 years later with my friends, yet I have never been in the city before. Most recent case happened not even full 2 months ago. My class was at an aqua park for a few days as an end-year vacation, and one day we were supposed to go to an old basilica. Now when we went there, I could perfectly navigate everyone, I knew what was where, yet I have never been there. I don't know how this happens, and it would sound fake, but every day since I learned to write, I write my dream on a piece of paper and put it in a folder. This was I can go back years and confirm that I actually dreamed of it. I had a fiance who was a heavy drinker. I honestly felt a very passionate connection and bond with him. However, the drinking made him abusive and I finally left him. But always felt a connection, I knew that was real. About 6 months after we broke up, I had a vivid dream that night that he showed up at a public place and was begging for me to talk with him and be with him. I decided in my dream to walk away. And that it would be the last I saw of him. A few hours later, I woke up to a text message letting me know he passed away in the night about 3 a.m. from drinking and driving. I truly believe I was meeting him in my dream and saying goodbye. I have had another uncanny dream where I foretold someone's name that I didn't know was their real name at all. I dreamt they were named something else like Brian. A few days later, they actually happened to tell me their real name, which was Brian. There were zero indications that I could have known this. My friend's mom was like a second mom to me. I went on vacations with them and such. Well, my friend and I had a falling out, and we got into a fist fight. So I never saw him or his mom again. She died of cancer. I felt I shouldn't attend her funeral, because friend probably has enough to deal with, and out of respect I didn't go. Well, about a week after she passed, give or take, she came to me in a dream, said goodbye and I love you. And let me tell you, this was not just a dream. I have never felt such loving warmth in my life. It's as if I got a taste of the heavenly realm. I honestly had no idea that such a deep loving emotion existed. Also, I rarely remember dreams, and when I do, it's usually because I wake up in the midst of it. I normally think, well, that was weird, and remember it because it stood out. This dream of her goodbye actually happened in the middle of the night. I didn't wake up during it. I woke up hours later and instantly was stunned and remembered it all clearly. Stuff like this is 100% real. If I tell someone that story, they shrug and think, yeah, I'm okay, dude. Whatever. But some of us know, not that we understand, but we know what's true and real. Shortly after my father passed away, my now ex-wife and stepson tried to murder me to steal the small inheritance. They tried to beat me to death with a kitchen chair. I survived thanks to emergency brain surgery, but my stepson is marrying into a deputy's family, so the cops charged me with assault. I beat the charges, but was left homeless with a brain injury. I wasn't allowed to press charges against them and they took everything from me, including the son I love with everything in me. I'm allowed to live in an abandoned house where I reach out to others in order to deal with my own trauma. I've saved a few lives over the years. But no one believes my story except for those that have got to know me. No one wants to believe that a sheriff's department would let an attempted murderer just slide. I even have an attorney in the area that backs up my story. There is a lot more to it. I'm still homeless and just trying to survive. I was in forensic mental hospitals for 10 months with serial killers and other murderers. You can literally Google them. One lady on my unit had killed a family because she believed they were casting voodoo on her. She keeps trying to get out, getting the rest of them. One man who used to flirt with me had woken up one morning and stabbed his girlfriend to death. My best friend in there once introduced me to a man who shook my hand then kissed it. We walked away and my friend told me that man's father had died, so he went around and killed people so his dad would have friends in heaven. For some reason he also ripped out his victims' teeth and fingernails. Staff confirmed it. The psychologist who did my intake told me he wanted to do my therapy, which the psychologists didn't normally do therapy. Saw him spending a lot of time with a woman on my ward who was in there for arson. He was doing therapy with her. He'd come to music class to play guitar for her and stuff. Later he went to court for her even though he wasn't her psychologist anymore in order to get her out, then he was fired for having been sleeping with her during therapy. I followed up on them in the news when I got out. They got married, had a baby, had some crazy domestic situations, then divorced. I have quite a few paranormal stories that I could tell, such as seeing spirits and even talking to them. But the craziest one was actually during sleep paralysis, kind of. Now everyone has heard of sleep paralysis. You wake up and your mind is semi-conscious but your body is still asleep. You can't move but you can see your room and many times people hallucinate. Well, the first time it happened to me, that's what I thought. I realized many years later I may have been wrong. I was pretty young, maybe 8 years old, and I woke up and saw a woman with long dark hair in a flow white dress just hovering above me. It was terrifying but only lasted about a minute. Now fast forward to about 15-16 years old. My parents let my now ex-girlfriend stay the night. We went to bed in my room with the door open, TV off, you know, all that stuff. I remember exactly how we were laying too. I was lying on my back, up against the wall. She was on her side on the open side of the bed. Then I woke up. I couldn't move my body but I was able to look around and turn my head. I saw the woman again. She was on the other side of the room, just staring at me. I remember she started saying my name over and over again. I started freaking out and realized I could talk. I kept saying my ex's name until she finally woke up. She looked at me in horror. Now the whole time it felt like my torso was free but my hands and legs were almost being held down. I soon found out why. She sat up and said, "You're floating." That when I lost it. I looked at this demon thing again. She screamed my name and flew at me. I felt myself physically drop down and my ex just sat there, pale-faced and looked absolutely horrified. She said right before I fell back down she heard a scream. I told her what happened. Neither of us went back to sleep that night. I didn't even sleep in that room for probably a week. That was by far the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Unfortunately, I don't talk to the only other person that saw it, but I will never forget that night. We were at a big high school party one weekend out in the country in the winter. Drugs and lots of alcohol. A small fight broke out and a whole bunch of us found ourselves out on the highway telling some people to leave. Someone else who was driving a friend home was on their way back, drunk, and by the time he noticed all the people on the highway it was too late. He slammed on his brakes but the roads were really icy and he plowed through a whole group of people, me included, while on a whole bunch of mushrooms. One kid died, one was in a coma for a month, another one, the girl hosting the party, was really close to dying. I found myself waking up in a ditch surrounded by bodies. I hobbled out of the ditch and fainted, got up, tried to walk and fainted again. My cousin picked me up and carried me to his van and we drove home. I have two. I was walking with my best friend near the woods at the time. We were 7 I think and just walking along the trail when we saw a deer like sprinting in front of us, like running like its life was in danger. Suddenly there was a whole herd of deer. I almost got trampled because I fell back when one came rushing towards me. I was able to scoot back so I only got dirty thankfully. Anyways, my friend and I were confused because there wasn't anything in the area able to make a herd like that run. We weren't even in an area where hunting was allowed, we have no carnivores bigger than a fox, and there was nobody else out. So we were confused and my friend and I got scared because what was there to make the herd go running? I'm pretty sure the deers just got scared by something moving and started fleeing, but we were kids so we didn't know that. The second was when I was in daycare, so I was around 3 or so. I was again playing with a friend, a different one near the fence that kept us from running into the wood. We were playing around, tackling each other, playing tag, hide and seek, act when I heard the worst sound I've heard ever. There was a big boom, then a terrible screeching, and suddenly there was big red truck not even a foot away from us. It was steaming and making this terrible screeching noise. I froze because that was terrifying for a 3-year-old and promptly fainted. Don't know what happened when I passed out, but I woke up in the daycare. Later I found out that the truck crashed into a tree, the front was crushed and it almost hit me and my friend. I was able to recover from my fear later in my life, but it was probably the scariest thing I've ever been through. Being psychic or sensitive to spirits run in my family. My grandmother had spirits visiting her, telling her about events that had not accrued yet. My mom knew if someone was going to die soon, heard her predict this myself. I have always been sensitive to energies and can feel negativity in haunted places and such. I have only seen spirits a few times, and my favorite story is about my grandmother decided to prove me wrong. I was at home with my roomie having dinner and a little wine. He did not believe in spirits whatsoever and started asking me stuff like, "So you think you have guardians who is with you at all times? Then how can you ever masturbate, just being silly?" My grandmother had passed away a year earlier, so my roommate asked if I think she is keeping an eye on me. I answered in the same jokingly tone that my grandfather died in 1986, so my grandmother lived without him on earth for 31 years. Also, before my grandmother passed, she saw her grandchild become a grandfather. So due to having a lot of catching up with her husband after separation, and us being an insanely large family, she probably had better stuff to do than follow my in detail. That night woke up around 3:30 and I can feel someone sitting on my bed. I turn around and there's my grandmother just watching me, smiling as she faded away. Glad she kept her good sense of humor in the afterlife. I'm not Charlie or Nicola. I was a co-producer and cameraman and driver. Every time-lapse shot and every helicopter shot is from my cameras. You can look up a photo of the crop circle called the Mayan Mask, which appeared in front of us in the middle of the night, 4 hours of darkness in Wiltshire in July, and I was filming from West Kennet Long Barrow while the other cameraman was on top of Tilbury Hill. In this area of England you can see lights and cars coming from miles away, and we didn't see anything in the field as we staked it out. The crop circle was not there when the sun went down and it was there when the sun came up. It was very dewy that morning and no footprints existed before ours in that field when we first entered it at sunrise. I would have made that the climax of the film because it was so astonishing. Unfortunately, Charlie Maxwell wanted to build the free energy machine with Nicola to try and take the why are the crop circles forming to a satisfactory conclusion. From the age of 18 to 19 I was in my first relationship with a guy 5 years older than me who worked with my mother at CVS. She begged me to meet him. Long story short, a few days shy of a year go by and I find him with a coworker in his parents' house doing the deed. My mother had another phone just to specifically talk to him. They had been together in some capacity. My mom stole drugs in this time frame as well, so who knows what they did with them. He was fired from CVS at the time as well. So much more with living situation. He lied the entire time about being in the army, literally telling me stories he heard from his brother who was really in the army. My family knew this the whole year and did not tell me he was lying. I then punched my mother several times in the face after my dad found the phone that was specifically used to contact this person. She moved out that night. I have since never talked to her and never will. That same coworker, he got knocked up by him. Turns out it wasn't his. This ex is now dead years after this all happened. I don't know how he died, but I felt remorse when I found out, and I was never sure why after all the fakery and trauma all this caused. I'm now 26 and all that affects every part of my life. I do not want to trust a single soul. I've seen ghosts or ghost-like things since I was a kid. In fact, most of my family sees them. I've seen a lot of things, but one particular instance stands above the rest and involves my whole family. We move around a lot, and in one of the houses we lived in was weird. It was my grandma's friend's old family home. The usual would happen, things go missing or we hear sounds where there should be none. But over half of our stuff was gone after a few days, I mean clothes, dishes, we even lost a few chairs. Stuff would be moved around, like when we first moved in and placed all the furniture overnight, it would rearrange no matter how many times we would put it back. At first my grandma thought us kids were moving them, but the oldest of the 8 of us was only 9. Then someone started drawing on the walls. Admittedly, it could have been one of my cousins, but it was too high. Someone drew a stick figure family about 2/3 up the wall. The family was of us. 8 kids lying down and 4 adults standing above us. After that drawing is when stuff hit the fan. Some of my cousins started acting strange. 5F, I found in our backyard standing in an ant pile unmoving. She was screaming at us to help her move. She didn't start screaming till we went outside. How long she was there. But she couldn't move even after we got her out the pile. It wasn't until we washed the ants off that she calmed down. About a week after that I started having night terrors. I wouldn't be able to wake up. I learned a few years later that my mom and aunt would have full-blown conversations with me while I was asleep. I don't remember any of it. What I do remember is a tall lady who wore a dirty dress in the top of the corner in my room, always glaring at me. And she would whisper all night long until I went to sleep, and my mom would talk to me. After my night terrors is when the whole family started seeing things. My aunt and uncle said this very small hunched-over man who would stand in the hallways at night. My mom and sisters saw the woman I was talking about. We moved soon after, but I would still hear the woman whispering until I was 11. Then it stopped.
I have a few crazy things about me. For context on the second story, I'm 28 female and have lived in the American South my entire life and have a heavy accent. 1. Every time I fly, I get strep a week later. Don't know why, but I've always been very prone to strep. Like, someone's kid can have it, but they don't and I'll get it. 2. In 2019, I, 24 at the time, broke my leg in 3 places trying to keep a student from running in the road. A month later, I had the worst pain I've ever felt, and 2 weeks after that, I wasn't able to walk more than 10 feet without feeling like I'd run a 5K. I went to 3 different GPs and they all said, in a more professional way, well, you're just fat and anxious. When my leg healed, I went back to college marching band and had to go to the ER after the first game of the season. The nurses even said I was just fat and anxious. I finally got the courage to speak up for myself and said, "Oh, bless your heart. Honey, I've been fat and anxious my whole life and this isn't it." The doctor, a young black woman, came in and actually listened to me and ordered a CT. She found a golf ball-sized blood clot in my left lung that was less than a millimeter from killing me. Took me out until 3 shows before the end of the season, and I got to perform my first full run on my 25th birthday in exhibition at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. 3. My sister and I are the only people in the entire world with our first, middle, and last names. We and our parents are the only 4 people in the state with our last name, and there are only 29 people in the country with our last name at last count.
When I was a teenager, I went to a boarding school. After the winter holidays, a family friend of ours, around the same age as I was, committed suicide in his family home. My mom drove the 5 hours and back to pick me up from school and take me to the services even though I didn't really know the kid. I mainly knew his older brothers and mom but no real connection to him. I want to reiterate that I only met this guy a handful of times. After I got dropped off back at school, I started experiencing a weird headache that I initially coughed up to just a simple migraine. Unfortunately, it got so bad that I had to go to the infirmary for an overnight stay. Here's where it gets weird. Once I was able to catch some sleep, I began to have the strangest lucid dream. I was still in the infirmary and in the same room, but the place looked like an unfinished garage. I walked around and called for assistance when I encountered the kid who had just committed suicide. I looked at him and he looked at me, wearing all white, and I asked him, why? And he goes, you know why. Okay, I'll admit I'm not sure why I asked why. I think it was a way for many things. Like, why are you here? Why me? Why did you do it? But his answer said a lot even though I couldn't explain why or how. I immediately woke up crying and sweating a bit. About 2 days later, my mom calls me and tells me people from home are seeing a psychic to try to cope with the loss. She then took a serious tone and said she had something to tell me. Before she could speak another word, I immediately busted into tears telling her about my dream and how it felt so real. Then my mom's voice started to tremble and then went into her reason for calling. My mom's friend, who is the mother of the then girlfriend of the kid who committed suicide, went to the said psychic and the psychic mentioned that he visited me. Even my mom's friend was perplexed because even she knew I had little to no connection to this kid other than meeting a few times in passing, and notably, he made me laugh, literally every time. Anyway, I guess the psychic told my mom's friend that the kid always had a crush on me but felt there was never a good opportunity to connect. She said that he visited me during the night. I have no idea how this unexplainable occurrence/coincidence happened, but it made me believe in the other side. The smirk he gave me after he said, you know why, was, in retrospect, discernibly flirty, but I just chalked it off as him being funny as I didn't know I was dreaming. I never tell people this fascinating experience because I tried once and I could tell I sounded ridiculous. I'm glad I can just put it here and maybe one of you will appreciate it, as long as you believe it. When I was little, there was a woman who sold pins and jewelry in the shop at the masjid that my family and I went to. It was a really small masjid, so everyone knew everyone else pretty much. But, probably because I was so young, I can't remember her face or name. Just that something about her terrified me, and to this day, I don't know why. As a young child, I had frequent nightmares. The only one I can vividly remember was about this woman. Some details are hazy, but I remember it pretty well, and up until maybe 2 years ago, I believe this really happened. It starts with my mother and me at the masjid at night, which only ever happened during Ramadan, so my parents could pray Tarweed. At some point in the night, I went to the bathroom, which was right next to the front door. As I come out, I hear knocking at the door. I remember the cool air I felt when I opened the door and couldn't see anyone. It was dark, so the only thing I could see was the sand where the light hit the ground. But there was a man standing there, and he asked for the woman. I don't know if I went to get her or if she had already come to the door, but I told her, he wants you. And then she went outside and closed the door behind her. I don't know exactly what I heard, maybe banging, or screaming, or something, but the sound scared me. I didn't go back to the main room and instead stayed standing by the door. When she came back, there was blood on the steps, and I think on her head, and she came stumbling inside. Someone else came to help her, I think, but it may be filler, and apparently, this is when I woke up. Soon after, it was Eid day. Prayer was held in a basketball court because there were so many people, and afterward, I hung around my mother and grandmother while they talked to friends. Eventually, they started talking to the woman. Her lower arm was in a cast, but that's all I remember. She stopped selling pins and jewelry soon after that, and I don't have any more memories of her. I asked my mom about it a few years ago, and she said it was all a dream and that the woman just fell down the stairs right before Eid and broke her wrist. but it all just feels so eerie.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.